Nate, I'm really glad to have you here. I mean, it's probably everybody that has seen me comment something in the last 12 months, the chances are that 1 out of 200 posts, comments is connected to you in some way or form. And obviously, that is because you're not just an amazing human being and warm and loving, but also that you have something that is really valuable, I think, for sales reps to listen into. And it's, I think, especially about this selling with. So I just think it would be super interesting to hear a little bit about, you know, how did you came to life with how this Nate Nasralla is, because so many people are starting to get to know you. You have a lot of followers on LinkedIn, but you also have, a very engaged audience. And it seems like your posting is really deep thoughts that a lot of both buyers, but also sales reps are really starting to relate to. So how did you come into, realizing this new way of selling with your buyers?
So in kind of maybe two ways, and I couldn't have told you at the time, but a series of experiences before going off to found Fluent in writing, selling with, doing a lot of my writing on LinkedIn. So I really wasn't active, but for like the last 2 years on LinkedIn, where this initially kind of started coming to me as the first company that I co-founded. We built software for nonprofits, fundraising software. And there's about 1.2 million nonprofits or 1.2 million accounts in the US who, different from kind of our friends around the world, the US relies pretty heavily on social services and nonprofits, and they have to raise money to fund what they do. So it's kind of like sales and marketing software, but for nonprofits. So that was our space. But the funny thing about building a SaaS company for nonprofits is all of those buying decisions are made in board meetings. And so when they choose how to allocate budget, you are very literally never in the room because it's happening at a board meeting. And so from the very first sales team that I started to build, my reality was, we can't be there. You will be. That means you're actually selling, not us. Our job is just to set you up and enable you to deliver a really clear and a confident message in an environment where nobody wants to spend money on software and technology. So that was kind of the first, I guess, environment in which I was building a sales team. Now, before that, some other experiences. One of those, I worked in valuation consulting. So we built valuation models for large technology projects. And ultimately, we had to distill a massive amount of corporate data information down into just a couple small sound bites that could be played. For example, if you are disputing IP rights in court, what are you going to say to convince a jury, hey, this is what it's worth? And so when you pair those two ideas, what I realized is, actually the best way to enable our champion to go sell is with something that's really concise, that sticks, and it's sharp enough to grab attention and to make people say like, oh, that's it. So then later, when I left and started building kind of enterprise teams after that first company got acquired, I built their enterprise business unit. Left, we started selling to Fortune 500 teams. I was like, this is the exact same thing. Like, sure, we may be in the meeting delivering a really confident message, but then what are they going to say afterward? And so I realized it was kind of the same thing, regardless of who you're selling to, where you're selling. It's all just a matter of selling with if we want to be effective.
Gotcha. And I think we're starting to warm up here, and welcome to everybody that is looking here. I mean, you're free to let us know where you're tuning in from. That's always a classic and always fun. But obviously, I'm sitting here with Nate Nasralla, and the topic today is that we're going to talk about how do you actually empower your champions to win with compelling business cases. And it's everything from selling in your buyer's language to writing these sound bites, crafting this narrative that really resonates and break through the noise in a busy exec's life. So Nate is, in my opinion, and I think in a lot of yours as well, one of the true leaders and innovators of the space when it comes to this specific topic. So for the next, I would say 40-minute-ish, we're going to go through a little bit on 3 topics. One is how do you craft compelling business cases? How do you create a champion that is willing to walk through fire with you? And how do you enable that champion to then win those deals by, for example, enabling him to really make a resonating message that resonates in, for example, a boarding meeting that we're never part of as mortal sales reps. Then we're going to have a live Q&A session, but I talked to Nate on this, and I think we're pretty much on to also have you guys just throw in questions, and we can just take it when it makes sense during the whole period of the topics we're going to cover. So feel free to shoot in any questions you have under the chat, and we're going to take it whenever it makes sense. And then we then have the Q&A to maybe grasp the ones we haven't gotten time to. And then we're going to have a giveaway, which essentially is the business template, the one pager that we've been using in GetAccept for quite some time now, and a lot of other companies that have been successful selling up market has been using these based on Nate's framework on how to build a compelling business case. And then looped in, there's going to be an interactive demo, because obviously we're a digital sales room provider. So we believe in the best way of presenting a business case is when you're also able to actually track on all those hidden stakeholders and how they're interacting in it. So we're going to show you how all this basically connects in a digital sales room. So you get all the best teaching from Nate, and then a potential product that can use to really help you fuel and win those deals in a very complex buyer and seller journey today. So Nate, let's get into it. I mean, what's your biggest challenge with business cases today? That is one of the polls that I think we've created for you guys today. And in case none of these resonates, we try to brainstorm on this internally and with Nate. But if someone doesn't resonate with this, you're free to write your challenge as well in the chat, because it's always interesting to see what you guys are actually experiencing in your life. And I'm just going to give you a few seconds to just go through this, and maybe while we do that, Nate, where do you see the biggest challenge with business cases today, classic business cases?
Yeah, so there are a couple, usually kind of in order of like most common. First would be, it's my business case. I haven't actually gotten any input or edits from the buying team, so I've written it. But what do they think? And is this actually landing? So making it more of a collaborative exercise than a one-way type exercise. The second would be, let's see. So go deep enough. Maybe one of those, get info about the problem. Usually most people just don't have any specifics, numbers, dates, phrases that are unique to that team that you couldn't reuse for another business case. And so it kind of comes out reading a little bit too much like a template, or it was written for a broader persona, not a specific person or an individual account. And then the third thing is, quite frankly, they're just not using them. For a lot of sellers still, this is a new activity where if you look at, and some of the data that we captured, if you look at percent of deals with a written business case in place, usually the typical team is just 8% of deals. So that, I mean, is a problem in and of itself. We just don't have them.
Yeah, it's yeah, true. I mean, not having a business case, that could be maybe a small thing, but obviously, making that business case versus making a compelling business case, that's where we start to see a big impact on the top performers, the differences. Epsta is showing out data on, I think it's a 9 difference from top performers versus low performers. And you had some numbers as well, I think, based on what you've seen when you have built these more compelling business cases. Could you share a little bit about how that's looked like?
Yeah, so at this earlier this year, we did a study on a cross section of about 1,200 different deals, and we looked at what was the difference in sales velocity. So win rate, cycle time, ACV, based on those that did versus didn't have a business case in place, defined as something written with the champion. Now the difference was pretty stark. So we're talking 12 versus 64% win rates, 47 versus 74K ACV on average. And what was kind of, I think, most interesting about like the finding is that all of those different velocity metrics tended to move together when you had a business case that was being built with the buying team. And so it's not that you are just winning more deals or you are just winning them faster. All of those things were moving together because they were tapped into the priority that mattered at an executive level. So it was like, I knew it was going to make a difference, but looking at the gap or the size of the difference between the two sets of deals across teams, it was like, I mean, it was pretty exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we're talking 52% higher win rate. I mean, that's something that most sales leaders would dream about, and obviously sales reps. This is people right now. I think the latest numbers was 75% of sales reps was missing quota. So I think this could potentially be one of the more impactful little teachings to put into some skill sets to actually learn. And I think that's where it's very interesting as well, because how do you actually, if you set the stage, 95% of the sales and buyer journey is done without you in the room, as we talked about. So we only have 5%. It's a small window. So when you say sellers don't close deals, buyers do, I'm thinking obviously you're correct, but it's also something that is provocative. So are you ever experiencing sales leaders that are, too proud to, and as a sales rep's coming to your sales leader tomorrow saying, hey, by the way, are you experiencing any hiccups on this, and how do you manage that to really,
Yeah. Where I would say is it's less of a pride thing, and it's more of a change issue. What I mean by that is, to write a business case, it's not just the act of writing a business case. There's a lot that changes in the process itself. For example, the types of questions that you're asking in discovery, how you're closing out that first meeting, how you're framing up and starting the second meeting to begin to build that early collaboratively. So there's a lot of skills and behavior change that go into building an effective business case, and that will start to change process. And what every sales leader who is kind of stuck in this like maybe 17 to 20% win rate like zone that so many teams are sitting within, what they're thinking about is like, yeah, like we should be winning 25, 30+% of deals across the team. We're not. That's a problem. But at least I know what I've got. And I would prefer to make some like small tweaks here and there for fear of like everything just kind of collapsing if we make too big of a change. And so it's less, most sales leaders that we work with are very willing to say like, yeah, our win rates are too low. Like I'm, very willing to say that, but it's more of the, I'm a little nervous about how this is going to go if we are truly trying to reapproach or rebuild the way that we think about working with buying teams. Okay. And there's this great clip that I've written about from, you ever watch the show Drive to Survive on Netflix?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's this one moment inside of the Mercedes Formula One team. And they're talking about the fact that they essentially, for a long time, if you guys aren't Formula One fans or haven't watched the Netflix series, Mercedes was like first, season after season after season, top of the podium. They started to slip, and they were having a pretty horrible season. And so their top driver is sitting down with their team principal, kind of like the CEO running the team essentially. And they're talking about like, where did we go wrong? Like, why have we been performing worse and worse over time? And essentially what Toto, who's the team principal, says is he was like, our biggest mistake was trying to tweak the current concept. We should have thrown it out and we should have rethought the concept from square one. If we had done that sooner, then we would have gotten back to winning. And so his point was, there was an old way of doing things that is no longer working, and we were just trying to fine tune and tweak, and it wasn't getting us to the type of outcome that we wanted. We actually needed to scrap it, throw it away. And Lewis, their top driver, is like, yeah, I totally agree. So as soon as they did that, they started performing again. But that's a pretty scary decision, is to say, like, from a very fundamental level, everything we've built has been around the sales rep and the sales meeting. We have to start doing things different to build a sales process around the buying process that's going on without us, and all of the change that requires, and like, I feel it, like that can be something that brings a little bit of nerves and some anxiety around it. So it's a long answer to a short question, but it was a really good one.
Yeah. So the change management is where most people are obviously starting to fear. It's basically what we're selling as well, right? When we're talking about focus on buyer enablement and not just optimizing sales process, because it's connected. So if we have to be very practical here, how do you craft a compelling business case? Like, what defines a good business case?
Yeah. So, and this is where we'll kind of unpack a little bit of the framework that we're going to share out afterwards in the giveaway. The way to think about a really effective business case is kind of like a series of little Lego blocks that stack up on top of each other over time. And there are some common elements to it. One, alignment with an executive level priority, which is essentially what the buying team is already sold on. They already believe that this is important. And so they're actively investing in dedicating people time to it. Second, what's the problem that's standing in the way? Like, we believe this is important and yet it's not working well. So why is that? Can we measure it? Can we talk about why it's getting worse over time? Why what we've tried in the past hasn't been effective? So that three, we've basically laid the groundwork, or we've framed in the problem how we are uniquely positioned to work with the buying team to solve that. So what's the approach that we're recommending? And when we do that, what's the payoff or the outcome that we unlock? And so that's what starts to build some contrast to the problem. Like, here's where we are today, not so good. Here's where we could be tomorrow, better, hopefully very good, the outcomes. And then finally, what do we need to invest to unlock that set of outcomes, what's required from us? And that's not just your kind of pricing or contract. That's also, for example, the change management, all of the time, people, resources, effort that's going to go into that. So that's the set of Lego blocks, if you will, that you stack up. Pretty common and natural to flow inside of that order, but different people may start to kind of, arrange and orient things differently. For example, you're talking to more of a vision-oriented person. You might kind of slide things around and talk about the outcomes that you're going for, but the problem in the way, kind of so on. So that's the crash course on a good business case.
Yeah, and I know, it's on a webinar. Time is already running, right? So we're gonna send this out after with, the recording, so you can always go back to this. But what is your best tips on getting this info that you need? Because obviously you're co-crafting this with your champions, or probably champions. So do you have any like ready to go tip people could steal for actually being able to get that information?
Yeah, well, where I think people get it wrong is they think that writing down the business case is something that happens at the end of the cycle once you've collected all of this information. And like, I need all of the inputs, and then finally I can build a business case, and it's like, okay, let's go get the deal done. And in fact, what you want to do is actually start with what you don't know and where the gaps are that you don't have input on, and write out what is available, and then leave some placeholders, some assumptions, some pieces that they can fill in with you. And so it turns into more of a fill in the blanks type exercise, where toward the end of our first conversation, I might say like, hey, it was a, great conversation, and sounds like Victoria may have a point of view on this as well. If I write out a short recap that we could share with Victoria, would you be open to that? And maybe even kind of filling in some of the things that we just didn't get a chance to cover, or I might have missed. And if you're up for that, great. I'll build out the first draft for us. And so I'll invite you into and say, hey, there are going to be gaps here. That's the space for us to create together. That's how you get more of that good input, and you get it earlier in the process. And then kind of last thing that I did within that phrasing is I just called it a simple recap. Like, if you want to start this early, most times calling it a business case, people might be like, I don't know if I'm there, right?
Yeah, I see. That's I mean, that's a small little detail, but framing how you're actually mentioning the business case, or in this case, just a recap, into a small little thing, so it does become too big in an early sales cycle. Also, because obviously risk and concerns can start to happen when they're like, oh, a business case, I'm not ready if I'm ready to put my name behind that yet.
Totally.
So I get that. When we then go into creating a champion, how do you do that from the first meeting, basically? I mean, what are you looking for, and what steps is it that you were basically going to go through to make sure that this person is committed?
Yeah. Well, we just kind of teed up one, right? So in the example of like, hey, let's share with Victoria, I'll get the first draft in place. If I leave a couple questions to tag you into, like, are you up for that? I'm going to start to get signal pretty quickly. Like, are you with me on this? And for example, One of the deals that I'm working on right now is so first demo was on last Friday. Went really well. I was like, hey, if I build a short recap, would you be willing to tag in a couple sellers? We can run kind of a quick POC where we'll build your business cases live. Are you up for that? He's like, yeah, great. One, he sent me some input. Two, he grabbed a couple other people from his team to schedule that next call. And three, he did it within a 2-day period. So we met yesterday, Tuesday. Toward the end, I said, hey, if we continue to build this out, are you up for it? He's like, yeah, great. I'm gonna take the example that we built today. I'm gonna send it out to our SVP of sales, and then I'm gonna bring him into a meeting on Thursday. It's like fantastic. Then he sent me a little kind of screenshot of what they were talking about in Slack, so I could see some of the conversation that the link to the business case sparked. And so what you're seeing is pretty quickly in succession. One, giving me input on the business case, partnering. Two, the ability to bring others together. And three, he's doing that in a very compressed timeline. And part of how he's able to bring those other colleagues in so quickly is he has a message that he can share, and he has written content that he can pass around outside of meetings, in between our conversations as well. So all of those things for me are very strong signals that, hey, this is not just a fan, but this is a legit champion that I'm able to partner with. And that's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're also talking about that a champion does not have to be a person that is, you cannot mention a person that is a champion before you actually, seeing the signals for it. And that's the ones that you're basically mentioning here, especially that it's happening in such a compressed time. Curious to understand, if you were to, for example, put in a problem statement on, let's say, a digital sales room, how would you, you're trying to sell digital sales room to a company that is selling to enterprises. How would you normally frame that, get that information out of? Who would you go to first? Would you go to a sales leader, or would you go to, a sales rep, or would you where do you get the information most of the time to build the first recap?
Yeah. So part of it depends on, so if you go back and you look at kind of the last, call it 10 to 20 deals that you won, and you look at the personas, roles, titles, what they do at their company, what are the patterns where you realize these people must be present? So for example, in both of our worlds, it's going to be a sales leader. Oftentimes it's going to be the end users. It's also going to be RevOps. Yeah. Sometimes they may have a specific sales ops function as well. And so you're going to have a couple different points of view. Sometimes we'll have the account team as well as new business coming together. And so you'll just look and say, who was present in the deals that we actually got done? Then the more interesting piece is to answer, in what order did they appear throughout the deal?
Yeah.
And usually there's a sequence. And that sequence tells you first who is closest to and experiences the problem and often owns it, and who is more of the person who's responsible for helping somebody else solve it when they say, hey, this is really bad for us right now. We've got to do something. And so usually that person who is closest experiencing the problem, they're going to be able to, back to your question around the problem statement, that's going to be your person who can give a lot more texture and detail to build a statement that is a little bit sharper. But this is where, commonly, we may have to go tag in RevOps to get some of the data around it. And a good problem statement is going to have numbers. And so we can start there, maybe some anecdotes, some language around the problem, but pretty soon after, for us, we're typically tagging in, if they're not the first point of contact, it's going to be a RevOps person who joins the deal next.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously the answer varies, but you should look into the patterns in your CRM system, look at the deals you want, look at what people have been involved. And then a lot of the times the answers can come from also below the line, a lot of that, because they're the ones that are sitting closest to the problem. And then you're basically framing first a message that resonates, and when you're connecting that to the strategic initiatives. So you're basically working through what we would call the value pyramid on creating some sort of a connection, because it's just a technical problem until you are connecting it to an actual business impact, then it becomes a real issue.
That's right. That's exactly right. And your point on kind of above the line, below the line is a good one, because your champion, the best person to build out the early version of that problem statement in your business case, isn't always based on a title.
No.
And so somebody may say, for example, well, like, I'm an AE, I'm an individual contributor, I can't be a champion. That's not actually true. We've had many deals, especially because we have kind of a bottom-up PLG motion, where that one AE will be rising far above others. For example, we had one mid-market user sign up PLG on his own, outsold every other enterprise rep, entirely different segment, outsold all of them in the year. Guess who had the CRO's ear? And guess who was able to land a meeting pretty quickly to say, yeah, here's what I'm doing. And that, like, their word carries weight internally.
Okay. So I think I read that story. You probably have a lot of them, but I read one of them and I was like, yeah, I mean, that in itself, you get to a position of influence based on your, results and numbers, especially when you're able to do it over and over again, and you're not getting there by coincidence. And if he's then able to connect the dots into your product Fluent being the reason to help him create those business cases in such a compelling way, that's, I get that for sure. But if you don't have, a PLG motion and you're doing something outbound, what are 3 ways to then know that this champion will run a mile to get this done? Like, what you get into the compressed part, and yes, but is there something else that, because something just to put in but texting, for example, getting on a text basis, that's one of the things I read from you is a good sign, but is there 2 others that are potentially something we could look for?
Yeah. So what I would look for is evidence of enough standing or track record internally to actually influence the outcome of the deal. And so an example of this is, let's say you are looking at a manager who was recently hired over, but you notice, if you look at the last 2 companies that she was a part of, call it the EB, your economic buyer, the executive, has personally recruited her to come join them in their last 2 organizations. So yeah, she may have a manager title, but she has been brought over multiple times, clearly, who ultimately is going to sign off on your deal, puts a high level of trust and respect for her work, right? So if she's backing your case, that's a great thing. It's the message plus the messenger. So that would be one example. Another example would be somebody who can identify conversations that they've had to engage skeptics internally. Somebody who is a true champion will tell you exactly why the deal will die, because they're in the know and they understand what other people are saying. Somebody who isn't a champion actually isn't able to label any obstacles, roadblocks, or skeptics, because they're not hearing that from others. They're kept outside of some of those other conversations. And so that's a signal to you of, well, maybe they don't have the standing or the level of oversight to really see what's going on around the deal. And that is often a hard one, because it's tempting and it's easy to just look for the people who are saying good things and say, well, clearly they're a champion because they love us.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds almost like it in the name, right? But you want someone that is also willing to do the fighting where the fighting needs to be done, and that is obviously not in the little flower area where everything is just sunshine and rainbows.
That's right.
I get that. How do you make the 5% count with the buyer? I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? The window we have to influence. What do you do to, for example, proactively engage the community of the buyer? Are you ever because sometimes a salesperson would be in a situation where he's like, oh, my champion is not a champion, but I know I need to talk to these people. Like, how do you multi-thread without hurting the relationship with the people you've started to talk to? That's a real issue that I've seen many sales reps beginning, and including myself. Do you have any tips for that in regards to based on being a thoughtful seller as one of the things you're really conscious about?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that is good to set up early in the deal is just a open conversation about the fact that, hey, we may be really excited about this. We may have a clear line of sight to it, into it, but I will tell you, like, this project isn't going to move forward if these roles, back to the point that we were talking about earlier, if these roles aren't aligned with us. And oftentimes what's most effective is together to be able to show them, walk them through exactly what the plan is, prove it out with some examples together live. And together, like, I'd like for us to work to that point if we think that this truly is a project worth investing in, because it's not going to get off the ground without their support. And so part of being a thoughtful seller is being very clear, being very transparent and open to say, hey, if this is something that you want, here's what's true about all the deals that died. It didn't go anywhere. And it was really frustrating for the contacts across the table who really wanted and saw value here, but we ultimately couldn't get anything done. So what you're seeing across your deals, it's a great opportunity to tee that up as context for, oh, this is why we need to thread in other people. And then the last thing that I would say is oftentimes when people get shut down from getting wider into the organization, it's often more of a mirror moment. It's less of a, is this the right contact? It's sometimes, do they feel like they have something to hide? Like they can't be transparent with others if I'm there in the room with them? Have I done my job to show why this conversation is going to go better together than them doing it alone? Because, by the way, it's always going to be safer reputationally, internally, for the champion to go do it on their own without you there. And so they need to understand, oh, actually, this is going to go better for me if I have your partnership and the teamwork here together. And then lastly, they just have to be themselves personally convinced that this is the way to go. So if they don't trust this is the right approach, if they're not feeling some transparency, they have something to hide, or the teamwork of like, I actually need you here, you're not going to get multi-threaded.
Gotcha. So again, being very clear, concise with the first steps, connecting it to the mutual action plan or whatever, way you would formulate.
Yep.
How do we get from now we're talking to a go live plan and a success further on, and then basically showing them the steps and also talking them through, because I think that what you're also talking about here is they're not normally buying these solutions that you might sell 5, 6, or 50 of a year.
Right.
And they might buy them every 3 years or something. So, navigating and helping them, but doing it in a thoughtful way paves the way to also be multi-threaded. And it's right. Not a later surprise that happens. That's what you're talking about, right? Because it's hard to do this on the back end of things.
Yep. That's okay. Right. That's exactly right.
So if we were to talk about insecurities of champions, where would you see the biggest insecurities? I think we mentioned it earlier with change management, right? But you were also talking about this formula at some point with me, that everybody has to go through. Maybe I think that would be very thoughtful of you to share here, because I think we're really onto something to close the chapter of how do you, create a compelling business case, create that champion and enable that champion. But in order to do that, I also think, actually understanding the fear, the risk, and that equation, having that in mind is super helpful.
This is the change equation that you're thinking about.
Yeah.
To make a change in process or behavior, like actually stick. Yeah. So by default, change doesn't, like it evaporates. And the reason is that there's gravity that holds us back, current beliefs, behaviors, even incentives. And so by default, anything that you're trying to change inside of an organization, even inside of your own organization, by the way, it's going to die out unless there are 3 things that together are strong enough to overcome that resistance to change. So the first is a dissatisfaction with the status quo. The second is a compelling vision of the future. And then the third is clear first steps to move in between those 2 states. And the thing is, like, they have to be multiplied against each other. So if any one of those is missing or it goes down to 0, like the whole equation falls apart and resistance wins out. So unless you are really dissatisfied with the way things are, you can see where you're going and what could be the case tomorrow. and it doesn't feel too complex to start making progress. It's a very simple, very specific first step that you can start to build a little bit momentum to overcome that resistance. Then you're on your way. So think of it as like dissatisfaction times vision times first step has to be greater than resistance. That's the equation.
Yeah. And I think we're covering we get Accept started because they wanted to eradicate 60% of all deals that ends up in a black hole. Like they're losing to status quo. And obviously, no matter what tool or whatever solution people are using out there, what is very interesting and what Nate is talking about here is the way you're able to write narratives, sound bites, information that can work for you when you're not around, even if it's just an email. Obviously, we prefer it in digital sales room, but then you're really putting yourself into the shoes of being able to influence when you're not around, based on having a compelling business case or a compelling story or message or something that resonates with the people by enabling that champion. So I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit on what's new, Nate, because I think, what you mentioned to me a little bit was that you've been working on a book. You've been doing a little bit of writing again. I love the first one. It's here somewhere in the book.
Yeah.
Along with gap selling, medic, all the other different interesting knowledges out there. What is that about? And could you maybe explain a little bit about this soundbite part?
Yeah. So once so this is the first book. It's called Selling With. I'm going to a workshop later, so I have a little stack of them. And when people would read the book and they would play back what stuck with them, usually out of a whole book, 20-ish, chapters, people really kind of take away one or two things, and that's what sticks with them. And time again, it was this idea of compressing your message into something simple, shareable, and that would stick with the buying team during their internal conversations. And so this idea of selling in sound bites. How do we compress and find more meaning actually by saying less? And that's actually really hard to do. It sounds at first easy of like, oh, you mean we can win deals? And it's funny. The record was just set. The largest deal closed on Fluent is $29.5 million. And it just closed last quarter. And when I was asking that user, like, how did you know that this was like, what was the moment when you were confident in this deal? And he's like, when I could finally fit the entire deal into one sentence for the CFO. And he's like, that $29 million came down to one sentence. And so we had just been talking about this reality is like, he really knew what his deal was about. The shorter and more concise and the more specific his message got. And it's that combination of something that is brilliant, meaning it's meaningful, but it's also really brief, meaning it's small and simple enough that it can stick and it can travel around the buying team. So that combination, that's what the book is about. Working title is Brief and Brilliant. And it's all about the art of selling in sound bites, which as we continue to operate in a more chaotic, noisy, distracting, just world and life every year, I become increasingly convinced that this is the skill set for sellers over the next decade is selling in sound bites, the art of being both brief and brilliant.
I get it, because the 5% window we have with buyers is definitely not 5% with the CFO. That is very different. So if we're able to, again, communicate something that is super complex, but in a very concrete and simple way, then we have something that could really stick in a boardroom.
That's right.
I have a question here from James. He says, when it comes to the final decision maker, economic buyer, how important is it to walk them through it as opposed to sharing a sync? Maybe you want to answer that, Nate?
Yeah. So James, what I would say is in order to get that meeting with the EB or your decision maker, somebody else is going to have to walk them through it. They have to hear enough to say, oh yeah, it is interesting enough for me to meet with James. Like, let's schedule that. And so the question is then, well, what's that soundbite that is going to hook them and say, yeah, let me talk more with James? So all for a deeper walkthrough to unpack more questions and thoughts with the EB directly, like absolutely. In fact, that's one of the best predictors of deal health is how early in the deal. I see Cam from Gong in the crowd. You could probably give us some data on this, of like how does win rates increase based on the early stages that an EB is involved. So James, the earlier the better, absolutely. But it all comes down to somebody's going to have to share something with them async to get them to that meeting in the first place. So what are they going to say?
Would you see a connection in the people that shares this async versus when you're there? Like, is there a difference in the win rate, or is it just in our seller's head that we're thinking we're important to have here?
Well, I think that's kind of one of the old ideas that kind of has to go away a little bit, is that for every one meeting that we are in with the EB, there's going to be conversations before to set up the meeting, and there's going to be a lot of conversations that come afterward. So even the people who say, I'm not having to sell async, like I'm in control of the message, fundamentally you're not, because there are more conversations that are bookending that one that you're a part of. So yes, it's great to have the FaceTime, and you need the FaceTime, right? Again, that's going to increase deal health, but don't forget that there are going to be more conversations on either side.
Thank you, Nate. We still have time for a few questions if people are, while we're waiting, if there's coming any. I'm just going to let you a little bit know about, obviously, Fluent. It's an amazing product. You can find that on fluent.io. And Nate is the creator together with another guy, if I'm not mistaken.
John.
Yeah, another genius, and that have created a platform that is basically able to take the teachings of what Nate is doing, combine it with whatever sales methodology that you're using, and then take, let's say you had 7 meetings, then you compile it into one message that is potentially able to help you build that business case that resonates. Sorry for breaking up, but I saw Adam just asked how big part of the business case is usually already complete before you even meet with the client. Is the whole thing completely built customly for the client in cases where you have found big success? I'm gonna let you take that one, Nate.
Yeah. So Adam, it's a great question, and I'll put some specifics around this. So to define complete, what we've built at Fluent is essentially like a scorecard to say 0 to 100, how strong. So you could call 100 like fully complete, like it's a really strong business case. 0 is a blank page. And what we found is that where that difference in win rate, 12 and 64%, opens up is when you can hit essentially a C minus, like a set around the 72% mark. And so that is what I would call a good enough business case. So you could kind of redefine, complete as like 7 out of 10, essentially. Now, where it starts, when you bring the client into it, typically it's a 3 or a 4 out of 10 is what we see, especially because it's early stage. And that's where, back to this idea of collaborating, gaps in the business case, holes, or the difference between like a 3 out of 10 and a 7 out of 10, that's how you're creating space for that champion to come build with you. So think of anything that is incomplete as like an invitation to come do it together. And for that reason, it actually starts pretty early when there are some big gaps.
Great. Nate, really, I appreciate the time to have with you here. I think, it's always interesting to pick your brain, no matter if you have 5 or 10 minutes with you on the phone, or if it's here where we had a whole 45 minutes. To sum everything up here, you guys are going to get a recording, because I'm definitely going to need to watch this again, because I've been also listening and trying to interact with you at the same time. But I'm going to need and sit down writing some of this stuff down. I think especially what you covered of looking at if they had hired a person that you're talking to before the leadership in other jobs, definitely shows if you're talking to a person that has some influence or not. Because I can 100% relate to that personally as well. Next, what we're doing is a webinar. It's going to be with Brad Parker, the CEO from FormPiper. He's a customer of GetAccept, and Brad is going to talk a little bit about how do you win up market deals, how do you actually win against bigger competitors by the way you're selling. So tune in on that one. The date is going to be announced soon enough, but I think we're going to hit the 4th of November. and around 5 p.m. European time, 4 p.m. London time, if that's helpful for anyone. Nate, thank you so much. Take care. Good luck on the workshop. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much. See y'all.
See ya.